"You don't scare me, old man." That's what the gang leader said, just loud enough for the whole diner to go quiet. Forks froze midair. A coffee pot trembled in the waitress's hand, but the old man didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't even look up. He just tapped the table 3 times, paused, then 2 more. No one understood. Not yet. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Calm, steady, like someone waiting for the weather to shift. Then somewhere beyond town lines, black SUVs rolled onto the open road, and inside each one sat a man who hadn't worn a uniform in decades but still moved like a soldier. Same eyes, same tattoo on the forearm, Foxtrot 6. And when they reached the diner, they didn't ask what happened. They asked one thing. Where's the problem? At precisely 6:30 every morning, the bell above the door at Helen's place would give its familiar jingle, and Raymond Clay would walk in, quiet, steady, and right on time. He never rushed, never changed his order. Always the same black coffee, 2 eggs over easy rye toast, and always the same table booth by the window far left corner. That seat had become his, though no one had ever formally claimed it. Folks in Maple Ridge, Nebraska just understood that's where Mr. Clay sat. Raymond Clay was 76 years old and lived alone in a small house 2 blocks from the rail line. For over 4 decades, he'd worked as a railroad coordinator, a man responsible for managing rail traffic through some of the most complex junctions in the Midwest. It was meticulous work demanding sharp eyes and a calm mind, 2 qualities Raymond still carried long after retirement. But most people didn't know that about him. In fact, most people didn't know much about Raymond Clay at all. To the townsfolk, he was just Ray the quiet man in the denim jacket and flat cap. He wore old boots that had seen better years and carried a folded newspaper under his arm every morning. Usually the Maple Ridge Tribune, or when he could find it, the Omaha World Herald. He read slowly, flipping each page with deliberate precision, never skipping the obituaries. His coffee cup sat perfectly centered on the napkin. Always black, never cream, never sugar. He didn't say much, but he always said thank you. Lena knew that better than most. She was a junior at the local community college studying early education and working mornings at Helen's place to make ends meet. Raymond had seen her since her first shift nearly 2 years ago. And though their conversations rarely went beyond the exchange of coffee and a polite good morning, sir, there was something respectful, almost protective in the way he acknowledged her. He called her ma'am even though she was young enough to be his granddaughter. She in turn made sure his table was wiped down twice and his cup never went empty. To newcomers, Raymond might have seemed like a relic from a slower generation, but to those who watched carefully, he moved with the kind of stillness that suggested control, not fragility. His silence wasn't absence, it was presence, the kind that doesn't have to fill a room to be felt. No one ever saw him hurry, no one ever saw him flustered, and no one not yet understood who he really was. Maple Ridge wasn't the kind of town where trouble made a habit of sticking around. Nestled between rolling cornfields and 2-lane highways, it was the kind of place where people still waved from their porches and where the biggest news of the week was who won the Friday night football game or who baked the best peach cobbler at the county fair. But that all changed when the ash vultures rolled in. No one knew exactly where they came from. Some said Iowa, others muttered something about South Dakota. But what everyone agreed on was this: they didn't belong. Within 3 weeks, the Ash Vultures, a motorcycle gang with flaming vulture skulls stitched into their leather, had taken over the old body shop on the edge of town. At first, folks just thought they were gearheads. Loud maybe, but harmless. Then the bar by the bus stop started closing early. A pharmacy's window got smashed, and 3 high schoolers were caught with pills no one in Maple Ridge had ever seen before. The sheriff called them a problem without a solution. People just started avoiding the west side after sundown. They didn't need to shout to intimidate. Their presence alone did it. Loud engines, hard stares, and a quiet sense that anyone who stepped out of line might not get the chance to do it twice. It was a Tuesday morning when they stepped into Helen's place. The bell above the door gave its usual cheery chime, but it landed heavy that day. 5 of them came in. All black leather and steel chains with tattoos curling up their necks and down their arms. The one in front, tall, coiled his jaw tight, had a massive snake tattoo that wrapped from his collarbone up to the edge of his jaw. They called him Rex. He didn't wait to be seated. Rex dragged a chair away from the center aisle and planted himself right in the walkway near the kitchen. His crew spread out behind him, lazy lounging, claiming space with the slow ease of men who knew no one would challenge them. The other customers fell silent. An older couple at the window booth pretended to finish their meal early. A young man in a suit stared hard at his phone. The waitress Lena set down a tray too quickly, spilling a bit of coffee on her wrist. "Hey, sweetheart," Rex called out loud and casual. Lena turned notebook in hand, trying not to show the shake in her fingers. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" she asked, voice flat. Rex didn't answer. He just reached out and grabbed her wrist. "How about your number for starters?" She tried to pull away. "Please let me go. Whoa now." "Why so tense?" Rex smiled, but there was nothing friendly behind it. "We're just being nice." His grip tightened. The room stayed still. No one moved. No one spoke. Except one man. In the far left corner booth, a paper rustled softly. Raymond Clay had just folded the newspaper in half. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. But his hands shifted slow and steady to rest on the tabletop. And then tap, 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 a pause. Tap, tap. It was soft, barely audible. But something had begun. Something only a few in the world still recognized. Raymond Clay didn't react the way people in movies did. There was no shout, no dramatic rise from his seat, no warning barked across the diner. He simply folded his newspaper. The motion was quiet, unhurried, each crease pressed with care, as if he were simply finishing an article. He set it beside his coffee cup, now nearly empty, and placed both palms flat on the table. No one noticed. Rex was still gripping Lena's wrist. The gang behind him was snickering. The elderly couple had already slipped out the door. The man with the phone hadn't looked up once. The tension in the room was thick but not explosive. Not yet. Raymond's expression didn't change, but his posture did. Subtle, controlled, like a man taking up just a little more space than before, straightening his spine, grounding his hands. Then his right hand curled slowly into a loose fist, and he tapped, tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. To most it sounded like an old man fidgeting, a nervous tick, nothing more. But it wasn't. It was a code, a call, a ghost of something once used in dead zones and dark bunkers when radios failed and silence meant survival. A forgotten protocol from an era when men like Raymond Clay didn't exist on paper, but were known by codes and call signs. Across the room by the kitchen doors, Earl Monroe had just slid another plate of hash browns onto the service counter. He was in his 60s, hair gone mostly gray beneath his sweat-stained cap. To the townsfolk, he was just Earl the cook, flipping eggs and refilling the gravy pan at Helen's place for going on 3 decades. Most people didn't know he had once served in the 2nd Marine Recon during the Gulf War. Didn't know he still had a photo in his wallet, 8 men in dusty fatigues, all smiling, like they knew a secret the rest of the world never would. But when Earl heard that tapping, he froze mid-motion. The spatula slipped in his grip and clattered against the grill. His eyes lifted and locked on Raymond. Raymond didn't look back. He didn't need to. Earl nodded once. Then, with no words exchanged, he unfastened his apron, hung it on a hook, and walked through the back exit without a sound. No one noticed. Not Rex. Not his men. Not the distracted businessman or the panicked waitress. But something had just shifted beneath the surface. Because Earl wasn't going out back to smoke. He wasn't walking away to call the cops. He was going to make the call. A call no one had made in over 30 years. A call that was never meant to be used again. But the protocol had always been simple. If the old man taps the table, we're coming. No questions, no delays, just move. Earl Monroe didn't stop to grab his jacket. He didn't glance back at the diner. He just walked calm, quiet, and fast toward his old Ford pickup parked behind the alley. The second the door shut, his hands moved with a precision he hadn't used in decades. He turned the ignition, backed out with one sharp jerk of the wheel, and headed west out of Maple Ridge past the grain elevator and across the narrow bridge that led to farmland, long since abandoned. 10 minutes later, he turned off the main road onto a gravel path overgrown with weeds. At the very end stood a sagging red barn roof, partially caved windows, covered in dust and bird droppings. But Earl wasn't looking for shelter. He was looking for the lockbox buried beneath the floorboards. He entered through the side and moved to the far wall, where a false panel near an old feed trough slid away with a grunt of wood. Beneath it, a heavy steel case waited in darkness. He dropped to one knee, entered a 6-digit combination, and lifted the lid. Inside was a military-grade communication console wrapped in canvas and lined with lead. The system was obsolete by today's standards. Cold War-era, analog backups powered by a self-contained battery that Earl had replaced every year out of habit, just in case. Today was that case. Earl powered it on. The screen flickered to life, dim green light cutting through the shadows. Static hummed low and steady as he calibrated the frequency. Then he reached for a small metal object wrapped in cloth, a transmission key etched with the old sigil of his unit. He connected the key, tapped in a numeric code, 78103211-207. Then he paused, breathed in, and entered the final sequence. 3, 2, pause, 2. The console clicked. A pulse left the barn invisible to anyone outside, but unmistakable to those who had once been trained to feel it. Miles away in a Michigan garage, an Ohio bait shop, a Colorado woodworking shed, antique receivers blinked to life. Phones that hadn't rung in years began to buzz. A message pinged across 3 states, simultaneously lighting up secure systems built by ghosts. No names, no voices. Just a sequence of words burned onto green screens. Echo signal, Foxtrot 6, code pattern, table 2. Time window, active. In less than 3 minutes, 4 men stopped what they were doing and began preparing. There were no follow-up calls, no discussion, only movement. Because when the signal came, it meant one of their own was in danger. And after all these years, the Brotherhood still held. The shadows still stirred. And Shadow Echo was awake again. Back at Helen's place, the air had turned heavy. The gang made themselves comfortable. Too comfortable. Rex now sat with one boot propped on a chair, his leather jacket peeled halfway off, exposing a sprawling inked serpent that coiled around his ribs and vanished beneath his shirt. His crew sprawled across booths like hyenas in a butcher shop, feet on tables, food half-eaten, drinks, spilled napkins, shredded. One of them had grabbed the jukebox remote and cycled through country tracks at full volume, stopping only when something loud and obnoxious blared through the speakers. Lena did her best to keep moving. Her face was pale. Every time she walked past Rex, his hand accidentally grazed her hip or brushed too close to her waist. Each time she flinched, they laughed. Loud, cruel, victorious. "Where's that smile, darling?" one of them shouted as she walked away. "Come on, we're just having breakfast." She didn't answer. She couldn't. At one booth, a father and his teenage son debated whether to stand up or stay silent. The father clenched his jaw. The son looked toward the door. No one moved. The cook, who wasn't Earl anymore, but a teenage dishwasher named Mikey, shuffled nervously behind the counter, trying to remember which burner turned off which pan. The eggs burned. The bacon came out raw. No one complained. Not to him. In the corner booth, Raymond Clay sat silently. His coffee had gone cold, but he made no move to sip it. He just watched. Every few minutes, he glanced up at the clock behind the counter. A simple diner wall clock, white face, black frame. Its second hand ticked steady, but Raymond wasn't watching the seconds. He was watching the time, because he knew what came next. Every tick was a countdown. No one else noticed. To them, Raymond looked like a relic, a man frozen in place. No one could tell that every beat of his heart was aligned with a pattern, a rhythm that had begun ticking the moment his fingers tapped that table. To them, he was quiet, still, old. But Raymond Clay wasn't still. He was preparing. And as Rex finished his third plate of stolen bacon and leaned back with a belch that shook the silverware on his table, Raymond checked the clock one more time. 1 hour down, 1 hour to go. The room still buzzed with the gang's arrogance. No sirens, no shouting, no one coming through the door. And that's exactly how Raymond wanted it. Because when the door finally opened again, it wouldn't be the sheriff. It wouldn't be the police. It would be men no one had seen in years. And by the time anyone understood what was happening, it would already be over. The roads leading into Maple Ridge were quiet that morning. Overcast skies stretched low over fields of corn and wheat, casting a muted silver light across the countryside. The occasional pickup rumbled by, but otherwise, it was still just another sleepy Tuesday in Nebraska. Until the convoy arrived. 4 black SUVs rolled past the county line. Civilian model Chevy Suburbans modified, but they moved like a military unit. Tight formation, no erratic turns, no wasted motion. They maintained an even speed just under the limit, with headlights off and windows tinted dark as obsidian. There were no plates, no markings. But everyone who saw them knew instinctively these weren't tourists. At the old Sinclair gas station, an elderly man filling up his Ford stared as they passed. He didn't wave. He just nodded, slowly, like he remembered something from long ago. A woman walking her dog near the high school stopped in mid-step. The dog froze 2 ears alert. The rumble of those engines, it wasn't loud, but it was steady, intentional, like a signal from a time before hers. The vehicles passed the Presbyterian church, the empty grain co-op, the blinking yellow light on Main Street that hadn't worked properly in years. And then they turned down Cedar Avenue straight toward Helen's place. Inside the diner, no one noticed yet. Rex and his crew were finishing their 3rd round of free breakfast barking orders and harassing Lena every time she passed the table. One had his boots kicked up on the booth across from him, twirling a butter knife in his fingers. Another had commandeered the sugar dispenser and was now dumping its contents into his coffee just to watch the liquid overflow. Raymond Clay didn't move. He didn't need to. He just checked the clock. 8:28 a.m., exactly 2 hours since the signal had been sent. Outside, the SUVs came to a stop, perfectly aligned, 4 sets of brakes, squealing softly in unison. And then the doors opened, all 4 at once, like choreography. The first man out stood tall, early 60s, with steel gray hair cut close to the scalp, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from a cinder block. He wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into black jeans, but his posture, ramrod straight hands loose at his sides, made it clear he hadn't forgotten how to stand at attention. 3 more men followed behind him. Different builds, different clothes, but they moved the same. Calculated, efficient, like ghosts from another life. Each of them bore the same mark, a faded tattoo on their forearms, half hidden under rolled sleeves. Foxtrot 6. None of them spoke as they entered the diner. The bell above the door jingled softly, almost too soft to notice. But Raymond looked up just once and nodded. That was all it took. The lead man stepped forward, calm as the Nebraska sky. His voice was low, steady. "Where's the problem?" And in that moment, the laughter died. The gang turned confused. But for the first time that morning, it was not the old man who looked out of place. It was them. For a split second, the diner froze. Rex was still mid-sentence, his boot tapping against the side of the booth. One of his guys had a spoon halfway to his mouth. The other sat up straighter, suddenly alert, but not sure why. There was no shouting, no drawn weapons, just 4 older men standing near the entrance, calm and collected. And yet, something had shifted. The lead man, Silas Boone, walked directly to Raymond's booth, his boots echoing softly on the tile. He gave Raymond a single nod. "We got the ping." Raymond returned the nod without a word, then leaned back, folding his hands over his lap like a man who had just finished his part of the job. "Don't hurt them," Raymond said, his voice even. "Just remove the problem." Behind Silas, the other 3 moved silently and with surgical precision. They spread out across the diner, one near the kitchen, one by the rear hallway, one stationed beside the door. Their movements weren't loud or flashy. They weren't trying to scare anyone, but it was terrifying all the same. Rex stood up, finally blinking. "Who the hell are you?" The men didn't answer. They didn't need to. "What's going on, old man?" Rex barked at Raymond, motioning toward the intruders. "You call your bingo buddies to come bail you out." Raymond didn't flinch. He just glanced at the clock. 8:29. Right on time. Suddenly, Silas moved. He stepped toward Rex, grabbed his wrist mid-motion as Rex reached behind his back and twisted hard. A metallic clang hit the floor. The handgun Rex had tucked into his waistband skidded under the counter. Rex grunted, but before he could shout, Silas swept his leg, brought him to the floor, and planted a knee on his shoulder. Calm, clean, controlled. 2 of the gang members jumped up, but the others were already waiting. Elbows folded, wrists bent backward. Pressure applied with the kind of familiarity that only comes from decades of real-world training. One by one, the 5 men were neutralized, not punched, not bruised, just immobilized, disarmed with practiced efficiency. Rex struggled beneath Silas. Who are you? Silas looked down at him, unmoved. No one you want to remember. Within 30 seconds it was over. Lena stood in the corner near the coffee pots, hand over her mouth. The businessman had lowered his phone, his eyes wide. The teenage dishwasher peeked out from the kitchen, spatula trembling. And Raymond Clay, he picked up his folded newspaper and laid it gently across his lap. Then he looked toward the window. Outside, the 4 SUVs waited. Silas gave Raymond a respectful glance. Extraction plan. Raymond nodded. No cuffs, no sirens. County line drop-off. Permanent warning. Understood. The men began to escort the gang members out one by one without a word. Rex was the last to go, eyes still scanning the room like he couldn't understand what had just happened. And when the door finally shut behind them, silence settled again. Not tense, not scared, just quiet. Like the kind that comes after a thunderstorm. The black SUVs didn't linger. They left town the same way they had arrived, quiet, disciplined, and without a trace. 4 vehicles in tight formation rolling down the road just above the speed limit, their tires humming against the pavement. No one followed. No one dared. By the time the convoy crossed the state line, the sun had risen higher, burning away the last of the morning fog. The gang members stripped of their arrogance, and their weapons were left at a bus station 1 county over. No bruises, no broken bones. Just 5 men with shaken eyes, quiet mouths, and a clear message. Next time it's permanent. Each of them had been handed a manila envelope with a single sheet of paper inside, no letterhead, no signature. Oh, only 4 words typed in bold capital letters: do not return to Maple Ridge. Back in town, Sheriff Donnie Mercer finally arrived at Helen's place. Lights flashing, boots heavy. He stepped inside expecting chaos, bodies, at least some broken furniture. Instead, he found the morning crowd sipping coffee, the smell of bacon lingering in the air, and Raymond Clay sitting quietly at his usual booth, reading the Omaha World Herald. Donnie scanned the room, confused. I got a call about a disturbance. Lena looked up from behind the counter, her voice light. No disturbance, Sheriff. Just a little misunderstanding. It's been handled. Handled? Donnie raised an eyebrow. He looked around. No broken glass, no blood, no suspects. I thought I saw a bunch of bikes out front. They left them, Raymond murmured without looking up. Someone will collect them later today. The sheriff squinted at him. There was something in Raymond's tone that didn't invite questions. Something calm, something final. Donnie shifted his weight from one boot to the other, uncertain. Strangest thing, he muttered. I could have sworn. He let the thought die, tipped his hat to Lena, nodded to Raymond, then left. No report was filed that day. The next morning, the motorcycles were found in the police impound lot, paperwork already filled out, neatly stacked, citing parking violations. No one knew who to credit. No one asked. A week later, a small brass plaque appeared on the edge of Raymond's table at Helen's place. Simple, unmarked, screwed into the wood like it had always been there. If he taps, leave. Lena noticed it first. She didn't ask who put it there. She just smiled and made sure that table was wiped down twice a day, even if no one was sitting in it. Raymond never acknowledged the plaque. He never tapped again, not that anyone heard anyway. But folks knew. Even the new ones who came in from out of town. They didn't sit at his booth. And if he ever did lift his hand to the table, they looked at the door. Just in case. Because the story had spread. Quietly. Through whispers, glances, handshakes. Across VFW halls and firehouses. Between veterans over poker games. And through old CB radio chatter. A kind of myth. A kind of warning. That somewhere in Nebraska there was a man who didn't need backup anymore. Because backup was always listening. The men of Foxtrot 6 returned to their lives. A hardware store owner in Ohio, a fishing guide in Michigan, a retired park ranger down in Kentucky. Their phones went back in the drawer. The system went silent again. But the Brotherhood? It didn't, because some codes never die. Some networks never shut down. And some men, they never stopped serving. They just changed uniforms. Life in Maple Ridge returned to normal, at least on the surface. The ash vultures were never seen again. Rumor had it they'd relocated to another state entirely, though no one could say for sure. What was certain, however, was that the rising drug traffic in the county dropped almost overnight. Sheriff Donnie Mercer credited it to a new enforcement strategy, but he couldn't quite explain what that strategy was or why it had worked so fast. At Helen's place, Lena returned to her usual rhythm, but something had changed. She moved through her shifts with a new quiet confidence. She smiled more. She stopped flinching at raised voices. And every morning at exactly 6:30, she placed a fresh cup of black coffee at booth 4, right before Raymond Clay walked through the door. She never asked him what happened that morning. He never offered. But she always made sure his cup was full before he even sat down. Raymond himself slipped seamlessly back into his routine. Coffee, newspaper, a few polite words. He still wore the same denim jacket and carried the same old folded paper under his arm. To the untrained eye, he looked like just another old man with nowhere to be. But the locals knew better now. They noticed how the few rough-looking strangers who passed through town always steered clear of his booth, how out-of-state plates occasionally parked out front, and how a man would walk in mid-50s, 60s, order nothing, shake Raymond's hand, and leave. They came quietly. They left quietly, but always with a kind of reverence. At the VFW Hall, 2 towns over, Raymond's name began to surface in hushed tones. Veterans, especially the older ones, started lowering their voices when his name came up. Some called him the conductor, others simply nodded and said, "He still has the keys." Every now and then, terms like Echo Protocol or Table 2 would drift through the air like ghosts from another lifetime. But if asked directly, they'd smile and say just old war stories. Nothing worth writing down. And yet something had shifted. It wasn't about Raymond anymore. It was about what he represented. Discipline, loyalty, silent authority, brotherhood that outlasted war. In a world full of noise, outrage, and empty threats, shouted online, Raymond Clay was a relic of a different kind of strength, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. He reminded people that you don't always see power coming. Sometimes it sits in the corner, drinks its coffee black and waits. And sometimes all it takes is a quiet tap on the table. Raymond Clay never asked for recognition. He never told his story. He never wore a medal or demanded a seat of honor. He simply showed up. Every morning, same booth, same paper, same quiet presence that spoke louder than any uniform ever could. His story isn't just about what happened that Tuesday morning. It's about the kind of man who understands that real strength doesn't need to be loud, that discipline doesn't retire, and that some oaths don't expire just because the war ended. In today's world, it's easy to overlook men like Raymond, the quiet ones in flannel jackets, who sit alone in diners, whose eyes scan a room not because they're nervous, but because they were trained that way. The ones who don't speak unless it matters. The ones who still carry codes most of us have forgotten. But every once in a while, something reminds us they're still here. And they're still watching. Foxtrot 6 isn't just a team. It's a symbol for every unseen network of veterans who still stand ready, not out of duty, but out of loyalty. Not because they were ordered to, but because they never stopped caring. So the next time you see a quiet old man in the corner, sipping coffee with a distant stare, don't underestimate him. Because if he taps that table, someone somewhere might already be moving. If this story moved, you share it with someone who understands quiet strength. Comment below. Do you believe there are still silent brotherhoods like this watching over us? Have you ever met someone who didn't speak much, but you just knew they had a past worth listening to? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tap the bell so you never miss stories like this about respect, honor, and the unseen heroes among us. Thank you for watching, and to all those who served in silence or in shadow, we see you.